Hey, what's going on, HDC students? Thank you for joining us another week. Man, we're so excited for you to be here tonight. But man, before we do that, Kyle, what are we going to do?
Roll the intro.
Let's do it. Hey guys, man, we have some quick announcements before we jump into tonight's message, guys. Man, we have camp preview coming up February 23rd, 6 o'clock here at the Victorville campus. Make sure you show up, man. Camp preview is going to be epic as always. What else we got from Kyle?
Yeah, well, camp preview is the night that you can officially sign up to go to summer camp, so it's kind of a big deal.
That's right.
But it's a lot of fun at the same time. And we want to make parents aware that we want you to come have fun with us too. You know, I know a lot of parents have questions about what camp looks like, where we're going, what we're doing, costs, like all that kind of stuff. And parents, we want you to come to camp preview. We want you to be just as excited for your kids going to summer camp as your kids are going to be to go to summer camp. So come join us as well, parents. We'd love to have you.
Yep, it's going to be awesome, guys. So make sure you sign up. Make sure you come hang out with us here at the Victorville campus. We look forward to it, guys. All right, guys, we're going to jump into our message, but do me a favor. I want you to take those phones, unless you use it for notes, put them away. Go grab your Bibles, go grab a pen, paper. Let's get ready as we head to the message.
Well, what's up, guys? I'm excited for this week as we jump into a really serious passage in Joshua 7. Now, if you've been with us over the last few, you've kind of seen that Moses, who was leading the people of Israel, has died. Joshua has now stepped in, taken on the leadership of Israel, and we're finally seeing God fulfill the promise and the covenant that he made to give the people the land that's been promised. And so we're coming off of like this really major victory at the Battle of Jericho, where we see God really lead his people into victory in such a unique and kind of weird way. And then we get to 7, and all of a sudden now the pendulum kind of swings a bit, and we see this reality check. And we see this really throughout the Old Testament often, where we see God's people kind of live in faithfulness, they see victory, and then they get complacent. Then all of a sudden there's kind of this crisis moment where then they come back to repentance, and then to see them walk faithfully, and then victory, and then again kind of this cycle. And if we're not careful, this same cycle, right, happens in our life as well. And so when we get to chapter 7, coming off of the Battle of Jericho, here's what we find. It says, "But the Israelites were unfaithful in regard to the devoted things. Aiken, the son of Carmi, the son of Zemiri, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took some of them. So the Lord's anger burned against Israel. Now Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is near Beth-aven, to the east of Bethel, and told them, 'Go up, spy out the region.' So the men went up and spied out Ai. When they returned to Joshua, they said, 'Look, not even the whole army will have to go up against Ai. You send 2,000 or 3,000 men, take it. Don't weary the whole army. There's just a few people who live there.' So about 3,000 went up, but they were routed by the men of Ai, who killed about 36 of them. They chased the Israelites from the city gate as far as the stone quarries and struck them down on the slopes. And at this, the hearts of the people melted in fear and became like water. Then Joshua tore his clothes and fell face down to the ground before the ark of the Lord, and remaining there until evening. The elders of Israel did the same, and it sprinkled dust on their heads. And Joshua said, 'Alas, sovereign Lord, why did you ever bring us, this people, across the Jordan to deliver us in the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? If only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. Pardon your servant, Lord. What can I say now that Israel has been routed by its enemies? The Canaanites and the other people of the country will hear about this, and they will surround us and wipe out your name from the earth. What then will you do for your own great name?'" And then God's going to respond back to Joshua. And he's going to say, look, the Lord said to Joshua, stand up. What are you doing down on your face? Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen. They have lied. They have put them with their own possessions. That is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. They turn their backs and run because they have been made liable to destruction. And I will not be with you anymore unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to destruction. Go, consecrate the people. Tell them, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. There are devoted things among you, Israel. You cannot stand against your enemies until you remove them. In the morning, present yourselves tribe by tribe, and the tribe the Lord chooses shall come forward clan by clan. The clan that the Lord chooses then shall come forward family by family. And the family that the Lord chooses shall come forward man by man. And whoever is caught with the devoted thing shall be destroyed by fire along with all that belongs to him, because he has violated the covenant of the Lord and has done an outrageous thing in Israel. So here's where we are, right? Great victory at Jericho. I mean, outstanding. They're riding high, feeling good about themselves. Joshua's going to send some spies in to the next area, Ai, that they're going to spy out the land, see what it looks like, what the enemy looks like, so they can formulate a plan. The spies go in, they kind of survey the landscape, and they realize, man, there's not a ton of people here. We could take these with a much smaller army. So they come back and report to Joshua and say, hey, listen, don't send everybody. There's no need to tire everybody out. We can just send a smaller portion, 2,000 or 3,000 soldiers can go in and take this no problem. And so in they go. In they go to Ai to go and take it. And instead of victory that they felt so confident they would achieve, they actually find destruction. They can't defeat them, and they're running from them. And it says their hearts melted, and 36 of them die. And they come back with that report, and Joshua here upset, grieving the loss of the battle and the loss of his men, all of a sudden now finds himself, along with the elders there, face down before the Lord, asking why. Why has this happened? Why did this happen? Now everyone's going to hear of this, and no one's going to fear us anymore. And God says there's sin in the camp. That somewhere along the way, someone has sinned, and you need to find out who. And so he lays out this plan. He says, okay, you're going to bring everybody before us, and then you're going to bring tribe by tribe, and I will narrow the tribe. And then when you bring the tribe forward, then you're going to bring clan by clan, and I will narrow the clan. And then once we get to the clan, then you're going to bring family by family, and I will narrow to the family. And then when you get to the family, you're going to bring person by person, and I will find the person, and I will show you who that is. And when the sin is found out, then it must be dealt with. And so then here's what we find in verse 14 then. In the morning, right, early the next morning, in verse 16, Joshua had Israel come forward by tribes, and Judah was chosen. And the clans of Judah came forward, and the Zerites were chosen. And the clan of the Zerites came forward by families, and Zimri was chosen. And Joshua had his family come forward man by man, and Aiken, son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, was chosen. And so then Joshua said to Aiken, my son, give glory to the Lord, the God of Israel, and honor him. Tell me what you have done, and do not hide it from me. Aiken replied, it is true. I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. This is what I have done. When I saw the plunder, a beautiful robe from Babylon, 200 shekels of silver, and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them, and I took them. And they are hidden in the ground inside my tent with the silver underneath. So Joshua sent messengers, and they ran to the tent, and there it was, hidden in his tent with the silver underneath. They took the things from the tent, brought them to Joshua and all the Israelites, and spread them out before the Lord. Then Joshua, together with all of Israel, took Aiken, son of Zerah, the silver, the robe, the gold bar, his sons, daughters, his cattle, donkey, and sheep, his tent, all that he had, to the valley of Acre. And Joshua said, why have you brought this trouble on us? The Lord will bring trouble on you today. And then all of Israel stoned him, and after that they stoned the rest, and they burned him. Over Aiken they heaped up a large pile of rocks, which remains to this day. Then the Lord turned from his fierce anger, and therefore that place has been called the Valley of Acre ever since. So it's crazy, right? The sin comes out, judgment is brought, and there's a ton for us, I think, to learn here in this. Now, what's interesting is we're seeing God deliver the Israelites, right? Finally fulfilling he's bringing them into the promised land. And so this judgment, as they're coming into Canaan, the judgment of the Canaanites that is being carried out by Israel, who's now claiming this promised land, it's the consequence of their sin that has brought this out. And now here in chapter 7, we see that it's the sin of God's chosen people who are being judged. And so they come in to Ai, which translates a ruins, and it's near this place called Beth Aven, which translates as the house of wickedness. So there's this thing that's happening. Now, what's interesting here is in chapter 7 we see that once they go into Ai and they're defeated and they're running, they're fleeing back, it says that at this the hearts of the people melted in fear and became like water, which is interesting because we saw the same thing happened in the previous chapter in the battle of Jericho, that the people heard of Israel. They knew of them, and they were scared, and their hearts melted like water. And so they're gonna send their army. They're gonna be defeated here. He tells us that 36 died. Like this type of warfare that they fought during this day, it wasn't uncommon that you'd have no casualties. You'd go in and no one would die. And so the fact that 36 dies here is a very, very big deal. And again, that just demoralized the army, just as we saw in Jericho. The same words that Rahab used to describe Jericho here are the same ones now used, that their hearts melted in fear and became like water. So we see this kind of contrasting account of what happens in Jericho, what happens in Ai. In Jericho, we see the battle, the victory there in that battle comes as the result of faith and obedience. I mean, it's a weird request. You're going to march around the city and you're going to play some trumpets and you're going to scream really loud and you're going to win. And as crazy as that sounds, that's what they do. Their faith and obedience leads to that victory. And yet here, just one kind of chapter removed from that, we see defeat at the Battle of Ai come as a result of sin and disobedience. And so what do we learn from this? I think there's some key takeaways for us here in this. And the first is this, that sin is never really sudden. Sin is never really sudden. It doesn't happen. It doesn't just happen. James talks about this in James chapter 1, verse 13 through 15. He says, when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. And when we look in chapter 7 of Joshua, verse 20, when Aiken says what he does, he says, it's true, I've sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. This is what I've done. When I saw in the plunder a beautiful robe of Babylon, 200 shekels of silver, and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them and took them. Right? He covets and he takes. He is tempted and he acts on it. And then he steals it and hides it, and ultimately he dies as a result of that. And so where Joshua, he sees the plunder, he covets, he steals, he hides, he dies. James says, listen, you and I, we see something, we are tempted. If we're not careful, we will be enticed by that. We will act on that. Then we will sin. And the result of that, ultimately for us, is death. And so we see this same pattern, that sin in your life and sin in my life doesn't just happen. We have to be on guard. When we feel ourselves being tempted, we need to recognize. And sometimes it's a fight and sometimes it's a flee. We get away, we run. But we've got to be always on guard and careful because we don't just all of a sudden sin. There's a process. Sin is never sudden. The second thing we see is this, that sin's never really secret. Aiken thinks it's secret. He thinks it's hidden. He thinks no one knows what's going on. And yet, when we see this happen, God brings this sin to light. And he doesn't just bring it to light in Aiken's life, but he brings it before everyone, right? Verse 14, all of a sudden, now we're bringing tribe by tribe. Now we're going clan by clan. Now we're going family by family. Now we're going person by person. It's not just a secret thing that no one knows about. Your sin finds you out. And you might for a bit. Aiken for a bit was able to hide what happened. But not forever. But not forever. And if you're not careful, you and I will convince ourselves that our sin no one knows about. That it's just a secret. That it can remain hidden in our life and our heart. And the reality is that that's not how it works. That it doesn't happen suddenly, but it can't remain secret. That God ultimately will bring this to light. That's what happens in verse 24. All of a sudden now Joshua, together with all of Israel, takes him, brings out, lays it all, and calls him to the table. Why have you brought this trouble on us? Right? And so your sin, my sin, is never really secret. So we see that it's not sudden. We see that it's not secret. Number 3, we see that sin is never really done in solitary. It's never really solitary. What I mean by this is it's never just affects you. It doesn't just affect you. In verse 4 and 5 of this chapter, we see that the reason that they are routed is what it says. The reason that they are defeated is because of the sin. Verse 24 and 26, it's not just Aiken that is punished. It's his family. It's his livestock. Like everyone around him. Everyone that touches him, if you will, is affected by the sin. And so sometimes if you're not careful, you'll think that this sin is secret and we'll convince ourselves that this doesn't affect anybody but me. And that is not the case. That's not the case at all. That sin carries on to those around us, and sometimes even from generation to generation to generation. My parents were divorced. The sin of my parents that led to that divorce affects me still today as a grown man. And I love my parents, but to say that their actions didn't affect me, that it didn't cause the ramifications in even my life as their kid, would be naive to say. And you may come from a broken home. You may have brokenness in and around you, that you've seen this play out. Don't convince yourself that that is for someone else and it doesn't apply to you, because sin really is never solitary. The fourth thing we see is this, that sin is always punished. Sin is always punished. Obviously here, there's punishment for the sin that takes place. Obviously here. Romans chapter 6, 23, we see Paul write in Romans verse 3 that we've all sinned and fallen short of God's standard and of God's glory. You and I are broken, sinful, just like everyone else. Verse 6, in chapter 6, verse 23, he tells us that the wages of our sin is death, that ultimately we will die. It separates us from God, who we are. We are separated from Him. When we die, we have no hope of heaven as a result of our sin, apart from what Christ has done for us. And again, that James passage tells us that, listen, this progression, if you will, this process of sin that starts with temptation ultimately leads in punishment and death. And the same is true for you and me. You can convince yourself that you're not hurting anybody or it's not a big deal, but it's a lie. And at the end of the day, your sin, my sin, has consequences, and there is punishment. There's always consequences for our actions. The last thing we see here is this, that sin is always pardonable. We see that the Scripture as a whole gives us hope. Again, we go to that Romans passage and we see that we've all sinned in Romans 3. We see in 6 that the wages of that sin is death. But even beyond that, 1 John 1:9 tells us that, man, if we confess, he's faithful and just to forgive us. And that book of Romans there in Romans 10 tells us, man, that if we confess with our mouth Jesus is Lord, believe in our heart that God has raised him from the dead, that we can be saved. And so where we see in Joshua 7, the punishment of Aiken's sin falls onto Aiken. What Jesus does for you and I is he takes on the punishment. He takes our punishment. He is our replacement, if you will. So that your sin and my sin, he bears the weight of, that we can be restored and pardoned as a result of what he has done. And so it leads us here today. What have you done with your sin? Right? So here's a few questions for you as we kind of wrap up our time. One, is there sin in your life that you have convinced yourself no one will know of? Is there sin in your life that you've convinced yourself that it's not hurting anyone else? And I would tell you that the Bible would tell us, life would tell us, that simply isn't true. Are you on guard against temptation? What are you doing to fight the temptation in your life so you don't even get to that point? And man, if you're saying, yeah, I've got sin, unconfessed sin in my life, I've got things that I'm trying to tell myself it's not hurting anyone else, or I'm trying to keep a secret, man, would you take some time right now, confess that to the Lord and ask for his forgiveness? You may, though, have never trusted Christ. You may have never. You're still going to bear the weight of the punishment of your actions and your sin. And yet, he has died for you so that you don't have to do that. And just like that passage in Romans says, man, if you confess with your mouth Jesus as Lord and believe in your heart that God is raised from the dead, you can be saved. We talk about that here often. We'll use, you may have heard us talk about the ABCs, that we would say that you admit that you're a sinner, that you need his forgiveness in your life, that you would believe that he is who he says he is, that he died in your place, that he rose again on the third day, and that he and he alone can save you, and that you choose and commit to follow him. Give your life to him. And if you'll do that, and he promises to forgive, he promises to pardon, he promises to restore. Sin is a very, very serious thing, and our culture wants to explain it away. It wants to accept things that God would not accept. It wants to minimize sin in our life and brokenness around us, and yet the Bible doesn't waver on this. It's so serious that he gave his life for it. And man, I would beg and trust and ask that you would consider that today. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for this word. I pray that you'd help us to take sin serious in our life. God, would we recognize, Lord, that it is never sudden, that we would always be on guard. Help us, God, to own the fact that it's not really secret, that it does affect more than us. Would we recognize the punishment and the consequences that our actions bring, and would we run to you for pardon and for rescue? Would you save us, God? Forgive us and use us for your goodness and for your glory. And it's in Christ's name I pray. Amen.
All right. Well, hey, thanks, Jody. Yeah, what a great message, really. I think it's a good reminder for us to recognize the fact that, one, like we're all sinful. Like we've all sinned. We've all fallen short of God's glory. And sometimes we try to justify our sin or make it seem like it's not that big of a deal. Sure. But it is a big deal to God. In fact, it was such a big deal, like he sent his son to die for that sin, for the consequences we deserve for it. So always a good reminder of that as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, just a timely message. So glad to have it. And guys, like I said, man, we just look forward to you guys. Make sure you take a look at this message. Make sure you just, think about your life and, how to process that as well. So with that being said, guys, thank you again for joining us this week. Man, we look forward to hopefully seeing you at Camp Preview. We'll see you next week.